You're listening to The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter podcast. Like us on Facebook at Business Plan Radio and follow us on Twitter at BizPlan Radio. That's B-I-Z Plan Radio. You can view our latest content on our Business Plan Radio YouTube channel. The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter airs Monday nights at 7 on your community station, 89.7 in mid-Michigan, or online at lccradio.org.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter, a forum for business owners, professionals, and students to come learn, get motivated, share their experiences, and discuss how to grow our business and the business community as a whole. My name is Ryan Carpenter. I am a local entrepreneur and your humbled host and moderator for these discussions. This week, we have our first actual business owner in as a guest. Now, a couple of the guests that we have had in already that did own businesses at some point in their lives, but our guest today is currently in the thick of things. He is out there in the trenches battling to get his business going, and I wanted him to come in to, kind of tell that side of the story. Moving forward, I want to have a lot of business owners in to tell their story. I want to hear of the time that it took, 3 weeks worth of eating tuna fish out of a can to get the business going. I want to hear those stories because I think that that's going to benefit the business community. When you hear of the athletes that are out there who, grew up in negative circumstances and were able to fight through that and get to, the big leagues, that's a glorious story. It provides all kinds of motivation and really makes people feel good about themselves and their chances of making it in life. And so I want to do that for business as well. I myself understand what it's like to struggle to start a business, to put all of your money back into the business and spend years of not having a set salary, of not being able to plan your personal side of your life because you are so invested and all in on getting this business going. I know what that passion's like, and other business owners also know what that passion's like. And so I want business owners to be able to come in, to use us as a platform to say, hey, I own a business. This is my business. And to be able to let us know about that, but also to be able to tell your story. I want to hear about the struggles that you've gone through to get to where you're at. My listeners want to hear that too. They might not ask you for it, but it helps. When you're a business owner, everything squarely falls on you. The taxes that are due are under your Social Security number. So if anything messes up, you're the one that has to deal with it. When bills are due or when your employees need to be paid, guess who needs to sign the check? That's you. It's the business owner. They have to handle all of that. And so being able to have other business owners come in, tell their story, explain the process that they've gone through in getting their business set up. Because at the end of the day, businesses are all similar, but also all different. So it's good to hear, maybe someone runs their business a little bit differently than you. And after hearing their story, you realize that resonates. And you think that, maybe if I implemented that at my company, we would be a little bit more successful. Maybe not. But at least having that conversation and providing the information will allow you to be able to make that decision. And as a business owner, being able to make decisions is a big thing. A lot of times you're forced into doing specific things, but being able to actually have information, sit back, make an educated decision, and steer your ship in that direction is sometimes a luxury. But it's something that's so important. It's something that you really have to do in order to make sure that you are heading in the direction that you want to. You don't have to do it every single day, but occasionally sit back and reassess. And so being able to bring in business owners and being able to have these discussions will allow us to hear what other people are doing. to hear what other people have been through, and to know that, yes, you are not alone, even though at the end of the day you feel like it, you're not. There's other business owners out there that are going through the exact same things that you currently are. And so let's come together. Let's work together. It's difficult out there as it is. So why not work together if we can? And that's what this show is for, is to provide a place in which we can all come together, where we can all have a discussion, learn, talk, maybe help have a positive impact. Maybe some of the discussions that we have here on this show will be greater than this show itself. Maybe we can come across some new way of doing things. Who knows? But we won't know until we start having these discussions. And so moving forward, I really want to make sure that we all stay extremely engaged with each other. I'm going to take care of a little bit of housekeeping real quick. In terms of that engagement, ways in which you can communicate with the show, Facebook is obviously one of the ways that you can do that. That would be facebook.com/business plan radio. Our Twitter handle is @bizplanradio. That's BIZ Plan Radio. And you can also email us at businessplanradio@gmail.com. So any of those three that I just mentioned, moving forward, if you have any questions, feel free to use either of those outlets to reach out to us. If you would have a guest or a topic that you would like for us to cover, please shoot us a message and let us know. This show is only going to be as good as the engagement that we can create with our listener community, and being able to know the content that you guys are seeking out will allow us to make sure that we're developing the content that is going to benefit you the most. If you talk to my friends and family, they would probably tell you that I'm a know-it-all, but I don't know it all. And so me being able to get that feedback and that information from you is going to be highly beneficial. I see certain things that I think are important to discuss, or questions that I've had along the way, and I'll touch on those topics, and those will be some of the shows that we put together moving forward. But being able to answer questions that you have, is really going to be what turns this show into a resource in of itself. It's going to be what allows people to come to this show and know that they will be getting good information, and that it will be catered in a way in which they are going to benefit the most. And so please, I'm going to beat this until it really starts to become a reality. But that's what this show needs is engagement with you guys as listeners. So please like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter. And like I said, if you have any suggestions, please email us. Our guest today is a gentleman by the name of Ryan Witth, and he owns a recording studio here in the Lansing area called Elm Street Studios, and it's fittingly located right on Elm Street in Rio Town. Typically, you think of the music industry as an extremely difficult industry. You don't really think of Lansing as a hotbed for Lansing or for music. We have, venues and we bring artists and there is an artistic community here. I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying typically Lansing is not what you think of as a music mecca. But he's been able to make a living, a pretty good living, doing music. And so I'll let him explain how he was able to do that. Because everyone's looking for a way that they can take their passion and turn it into a profitable venture. So he'll explain a little bit about that, but that's not all he does. He's also the executive director of the Rio Town Commercial Association, and that is a nonprofit that I'll let him again explain when he comes in here a little bit. But their main goal is to positively impact the local community over there in the Rio Town area, just south of downtown. He also is owner of probably the best named business in all of Lansing, Super Fancy Enterprise. And that is a group of friends and his wife and himself. And I'll let him explain that as well when he comes in. But he's very involved, as you can tell. He's one of those people that doesn't just do one thing and sits back and enjoys it, but he tries to spearhead and steer the direction and impact the community in ways that not a lot of people are really actively doing. And so, being able to bring him in as a business owner to talk about that, and also to be able to talk about the involvement of the business community in the actual community too, I think will be very beneficial. So to be able to hear his story is going to be a good one, and I'm excited to have him in. Now, he has been sick over the past few weeks, so he is going to sound like he's got a little bit of a cold, which most of us Michiganders should be used to, because if you go anywhere else, that's kind of how they think we sound anyway. Very nasally. So I guess appropriate time for me to take a sniff there. But I want to create the same type of congruency within the business community that they are trying to create over there. I want to work together as a business community. A lot of times businesses are competitive with each other, and I get that side. We're all competing for the same dollar. But at the end of the day, if we work together, we can have a bigger impact. We can help to create an environment here in Lansing that's conducive for everyone's success, not just a few. And so being able to have these discussions, being able to bring in business owners, being able to bring in people who are involved in the business community, politicians, professors, all of these different guests that we want to bring in will hopefully really help to have that conversation that needs to be had, to provide that information that may be lacking or may be difficult to find, and to highlight those resources that are available. So that in a nutshell is what this show is. And our guest today is just continuing on with that tradition. So if you have any suggestions, please feel free to email us or to interact with our social media. We're going to go to a quick break real quick, and when we come back, we will have Ryan Wirt with us, talking about the many, 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 many things that he is involved in, and I look forward to that. So stick around with us. We have a great show today. This is the 4th ever episode of The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter on LCC's WLNZ 89.7 Lansing.
You're listening to The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter podcast. Like us on Facebook at Business Plan Radio, and follow us on Twitter at BizPlan Radio. That's B-I-Z Plan Radio. You can view our latest content on our Business Plan Radio YouTube channel. The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter airs Monday nights at 7 on your community station, 89.7 in mid-Michigan, or online at lccradio.org.
All right, welcome back to the second segment of The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter. As mentioned in the previous segment, our guest today is Ryan Wirt. He is the owner and operator at Elm Street Recordings over in Rio Town. He is also the executive director of the Rio Town Commercial Association and partial owner in a company called Super Fancy Enterprises with his wife and some friends, which I'll let him kind of speak about that a little bit. So, Ryan, thank you so much for coming in today. You're actually our first business owner guest. So far, we've actually had resources come in with the Small Business Development Center as well as the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. And so this show is kind of set up to provide resources and education to business owners. And so I'm excited to have our first actual business owner in today, so that they can kind of talk about some of the different things that we have to deal with out there in the business environment. So thanks again for coming in. We really appreciate having you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So why don't you first just kind of let everyone know what it is that you do? I mean, I think, typically when people think of music, they don't really think of it as a viable business. And so, I myself actually had a background in music as well, on the business side. So it's exciting to have you in for that as well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do?
Yeah, so I always kind of tell people that my real job is running a recording studio. That's how I started, and it's my primary thing. So I'm a freelancer. Typically, bands, rappers, orchestras, whoever hires me, and it varies a lot from gig to gig what exactly I'm doing, but more or less making the album. So I think people have this idea that a band writes songs and then they show up to a studio and someone hits the record button and then an hour later you've got the record. And that's not at all how it works.
Right.
It's hours and hours and hours and hours of work and lots of tedium and boredom and so on. So that's where I come in.
I own a media production company. So, I think that people have very similar thoughts as to how videos get made.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. You just point the camera and hit record,
Yeah,
right?
I can do that on my phone, man.
Yeah, you can. You're correct. So music. So what got you into music? Has it been something that you've always been into?
Yeah, so I was in a band in like middle school and high school and into college a little bit, and I kind of early on realized like I don't really like performing. Some people get a real rush being in front of people.
Right.
That was never my gig. Like hated it. It was not like a nerves thing necessarily. It was just like something to kind of get through.
Right.
And I really, really liked recording. I liked making albums. And so, early on I realized that was something that really appealed to me, and like the idea of kind of making a document and having a permanent thing.
Right.
I ended up going to college. I went to Hope College over on the west side for recording arts. That was that. And the more I got into recording, the less I was into playing, and now I can't play guitar to save my life.
Well, good. You have people that can come in and pay you to do that.
That's
instead,
right.
So it doesn't really matter anymore. All right. So you went to Hope. Did they have traditionally a good recording arts program, or were you going up there for the school and just happened to get into the recording arts? Or?
So they actually don't have any recording arts program at all to speak of. I applied to a bunch of schools. I checked out MSU and U of M and all the big ones, and and Hope because some friends were going there. And then I kind of met the summer, or while I was in my senior year of high school, I met their recording guy, his name's John Erskine. He's awesome, but he did like the early Sonic Youth albums and Steve Reich and Philip Glass and like a bunch of minimalist classical and some like way out there cool stuff.
Right.
And so we kind of hit it off, and he was like, well, we don't have a program. You can come hang out with me for 4 years. We'll just sort of make it work. Hope's a small enough school that like I wrote my curriculum, and then my major was a bunch of Hope classes with some GRCC like physics and acoustics classes and stuff like that thrown in. And so my degree is in recording arts. I was the only one in the program, which meant I got to sleep in the studio when I felt like it.
Nice.
and kind of have free run of the place.
So you probably finished in the top 10 of your class then.
That's right. Yep.
Cool. Okay. So once you got done with school, did you get your business started while you were in school, or was that something that you did once you kind of went through the process of school and finished that up?
So I actually graduated a semester early. So after my third year, I moved to Lansing to intern. So I interned for Glenn Brown, who still runs a studio kind of on the far east edge of East Lansing, Glenn Brown Productions. And Glenn was college buddies with John Erskine, who I was under. And so I moved here to intern for him, which I did kind of full time. And while I was doing that, I started, I was recording on my own on the side, like everyone does when they're kind of starting out. And I rented a room in a house, so I didn't really have a space, so I was doing it mobily. And then I graduated and decided to kind of stay in Lansing and continued working for Glenn as his assistant. Bought a house then, which was condemned. So then I was working out of the house, working as Glenn's assistant, working at another studio in DeWitt, and kind of doing all three. And then slowly but surely got busier. Dropped the studio in DeWitt, was just working for myself and Glenn, and then got busier and busier and stopped working for Glenn, and I was working out of the house.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty interesting. You don't really think of Lansing as a music hotbed by any chance. But that being said, there's definitely some people here who have worked on some pretty cool things, and I've noticed that a lot in the music industry. Just some random guy in the music industry has worked with all kinds of crazy people, right? They're just living in some rinky-dink town outside of Detroit or what have you, and so it's just kind of a small world like that in terms of people having a slice of the pie in the music industry, and you don't really think it. So how has Lansing as a city been, for you as a recording artist and as a small business owner?
Lansing's been really good for me. Glenn, I think, is a hidden treasure in the city. Glenn built Eminem's studio, and he built Kid Rock's studio,
right,
and mixed their last records and all that stuff. So through that, I made a lot of connections. I got to know the Verve Pipe guys pretty well. The drummer from that's a good friend of mine. I've worked on his projects, and I think Lansing is there's kind of a music ecosystem in Michigan where there's Detroit, which is its own thing, and then there's everything else.
Right.
And Lansing, for the everything else, becomes sort of the center. It's not necessarily the musically hippest city or the busiest city, but it means I'm working with Lansing bands, I'm working with Grand Rapids bands, I'm working with Ann Arbor bands. Right. We're sort of in the middle of it all.
Yeah, and that's actually part of the reason why I started my business here. We don't do recording. Well, we do kind of to a degree, but just the central location. We're in the city of Lansing. We're an hour away from every single major city in the whole state.
Exactly.
Minus Traverse City, but that's worth the drive. And that's where your wife's actually from. Correct?
Yeah.
So the central location of Lansing is fabulous. As far as the business community and being able to tie into that, how has that been from, coming from kind of more of the music side, which may be, not the typical business,
Right. It's been interesting. I think we always kind of talk about Lansing as it's a mid-sized city that feels a lot like a small town,
right?
Where through the other stuff I'm involved in that we'll kind of get to, growing up in a bigger city government, for example, is always sort of an abstraction. That there's a mayor and that there's a city council, but they're not real people. Where here it's it's city council. I go out and get drinks with several of those people, right. And I can call the mayor if I need to. So being in a city this size, I think it's really nice as a small business owner because you have actual real access to some of those resources that in a lot of places it just wouldn't be possible. They're real people. They're not sort of figures. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, what I want to do is I kind of want to go back a little bit. I really want this show to be a place where business owners can come on and kind of tell their story. We've kind of alluded to where you went to school and what it is you do kind of to a degree, but why don't you talk a little bit about what it was like starting a recording studio, and how you went about maybe getting that established and getting your first client. What's a process like that for a recording studio?
So I, like I said, I moved here in 2003. Yes, and I'd been recording while I was in college some, so I kind of had some clients, mostly on the west side of the state, and then my wife and I bought this condemned house, girlfriend at the time, and my grandparents were also small business owners. Coincidentally, they owned a ma and pa hardware store. My mom grew up in the basement, and all of her siblings are super handy, and so is she. So we had that kind of resource behind us where we could buy this place where fell through the kitchen floor and all that stuff, and fixed it up. So that was a big part of it for us. So Rio Town at the time wasn't a real thing. The nonprofit was sort of in place at that point. The name had been established, but it wasn't an actual destination of any kind. So our house was super cheap. We moved in, was able to work out of the house. My wife's a teacher, which was great because that was sort of our reliable, steady income, real job. And
gotta have one of those.
Yeah. And the first couple of years, like any business, were a struggle, and you never really knew, like, when a slow month came along, it was like, well, is this the end? What happens next?
Right.
And then as things kind of got going and got busier, then you realize, like, oh, there's a cycle, and in the summer things are going to be slow, and that's cool. Just got to be aware of it.
Right.
So yeah, as I got busier and busier, it got to where, like, with my wife being a teacher, having rappers over till 2 a.m. on a Tuesday wasn't really cool anymore.
Right.
So then the house next door to us went up for sale, kind of right at the point when we were looking for commercial space. And so we bought the house next door, which was also condemned, fixed that up, and that became the studio. And at that point, that was probably 5 or 6 years ago, the studio was established enough where I don't advertise it anymore. I get to kind of pick my clients. I have a hard time returning all the phone calls I get, as you've experienced a bunch of times.
I've been on that end.
Yep. Where it's like, I'm really not trying to blow people off. It's just hard to keep up. So it's great now going from a business that, is in a tough competitive industry and was really, like, it was a real struggle for many years, to be at a point now where it's kind of like, oh yeah, this studio's cool. I don't need to worry about that.
Right. Yeah, that's a good place to be in. So when did that finally happen? Like, how long had you owned the business before, not necessarily that you broke even necessarily, but to where it started to become a viable profitability?
It was probably 2 or 3 years in, 3 or 4 years in, maybe even. There was, there's the point of, like, really questioning if this is going to work, and then you get to, this is working for now, and not sure if it's going to keep working. And that was probably the 2 or 3 year point. And then after maybe 5 years, it was like, no, this is going to work and continue working.
Did you, because obviously when you're a business owner, and we had talked about this before we came on, but, everything kind of falls on you. As a business owner, you're the one that has to kind of deal with all the stresses and responsibilities. Were there any resources or any entities that you reached out to or that you worked in conjunction with, or did you have any guidance in terms of having someone to help you to get to that place?
I didn't, and since then I've connected with a million different entities that would have been invaluable at the time.
That's kind of the exact experience that I've had. That's why I started this show, because I wanted to let people know these resources that are available, so it can help them when they need it.
Yeah, I had no idea. I knew nothing about home ownership, running a business. I didn't know anything about anything when I kind of started. And yeah, I fumbled my way through. And yeah, like many people since then, it's like, oh, there's Leap, and there's Scenair, and there's the SBDC, and there are all these other entities around.
Yep.
And I knew nothing going in.
Yeah, well, a lot of times too, business owners, especially if it's, if they're coming up with something, or like you're not necessarily developing something new, but your expertise is in, music production and stuff like that. Right. It's not in finance and taxes,
right.
All this stuff. Every business, there's certain things that every business has to do, no matter what business you're in. And a lot of times, people don't really necessarily have that background. They didn't go to the business school. And even if you did go to the business school, seeing it in a book versus, applying it to something that you have to go through and are legally binded to is a completely different process. So, hopefully that this show can kind of help to let people know of some of those different resources that are available to them. So you were fortunate to come from a family of entrepreneurs. Do you think that played into you wanting to do this at all? Like, did you always want to kind of work for yourself, or?
I think I have the kind of like, I don't know, like American come up story of, my grandparents owned a hardware store, but it was, they scraped by, they retired with nothing, whatever. My mom literally lived in the basement when she was a kid. Like they lived in the basement of the hardware store. Right. I'm sure it wouldn't be legal now. And so then my parents both had, real jobs. They both actually work for Farmers Insurance in Grand Rapids. But I grew up, the bus dropped me off at the hardware store when I was in elementary school, and that was my like after school care. So I kind of grew up. Yeah, I sort of grew up in an environment where my grandparents were doing their own thing, and so I kind of saw that. And then my parents, I think there's always like a cycle. So my parents had the stable adult jobs and were firmly middle class, and that kind of allowed me to do whatever I wanted. Like it's the pendulum swinging back and forth.
Yep.
So
the yin to the yang.
Yeah, exactly.
Always got to be a balance.
Yeah, and my parents have always been super supportive. I mean, they've helped with everything along the way, from framing and walls and all that stuff to whatever. So yeah, I think seeing it in action in my grandparents and then having a foundation in my parents was a huge plus.
Oh yeah. Let's see. So we've kind of predominantly been talking about the recording studio, and rightfully so, because that's what kind of has allowed you to start to get involved in some of these other things and really start to, have a foothold in the local business community. Yeah. In the second segment, I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about the Riotown Commercial Association and some of the things that you guys have going on over there. So we'll kind of hold off on that for now. But why don't you kind of get into this super fancy enterprise a little bit? I'm pretty intrigued by that, because it's not just you that owns that, correct?
Right, correct. Yeah. So rewinding slightly, so we bought our house, then we bought the house next door for the studio, and that was kind of right when the housing market took a turn. So I mean, the studio house was $8,000. Like it was pennies. Right. And so our neighborhood in kind of the Riotown area is still in a weird place of flux where there are people kind of turning the neighborhood around, and then there are some slumlords kind of like running houses into the ground, and anything that's in the cheap housing market, it's like a flip of a coin which way it's going to go. Like either it's going to get run into the ground and in 2 years have to get demolished, which I think 5 houses came down in our neighborhood this summer, or someone's going to buy it and fix it up and it's going to be great. But it goes one way or the other. So we kind of made a decision. So we bought our first rental house 4 years ago, something like that. And then we have a bunch of neighbors through the Riotown Commercial Association that we do lots of projects with, which we'll get to. But we kind of made an agreement where it was like, if a house comes up for sale in our neighborhood and it's $20,000, one of us just has to buy it. And then we can sort of start to stabilize things, one house at a time. So we bought our first rental house, then they bought a rental house, then we bought a rental house. So we have 2 rental houses now. And then it got to where it was like, well, we've done a lot of development work in the commercial district, but we don't really have a foothold down there. We're all in the block down. It's like, well, we're trying to bring the neighborhood up, but also, bring the commercial district up, but we're also trying to add some additional tax assessments and things like that. And it's like, well, it's not really cool for us to be pushing for these things when none of them affect us. So we should be part of this. Right. So we decided we should buy a commercial property. We looked at a couple, we made a few offers, a couple didn't pan out. And then beautifully, the building that the Riotown pub is in, which is my neighborhood bar, second home, where I have most of my meetings, it's the place to be, was up for sale. And so our friends, Hillary and AJ Wililko, we formed an LLC, Super Fancy Enterprises, and bought a piece of commercial property. So we just closed on it less than a month ago. So that's a very recent thing.
Do you guys have a Super Fancy logo?
We certainly do. Super Fancy actually came about. It was going to be a Riotown fundraiser. We'll get into that later too. That we kind of abandoned, and then it was like, well, we need an LLC name. Let's just use this. It's funny, whatever. Yeah. And now the fundraiser's coming back, and we're doing it for real. So Super Fancy is our label for lots of things.
That's cool, though. Friends, people who, friends and family, technically. Your wife is involved in it, yeah. And so it's fun, I don't think that people really ever think of, business as something that you can kind of do as as a side fun project.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you and your friends go, mountain biking once a month or something like that, and you have a little club, you could do that with business too.
Yeah.
On a smaller scale.
Yeah, almost. I'm very fortunate in that almost everything we do, like whether it's profitable or not, we don't pursue anything because of the money involved. It's worked out really well where I make a living doing a lot of things that I think are really fun.
Right.
But it's always like, you know what, I really like the bar. It'd be cool to own this thing.
Right.
And it's not about, I mean, going in, you have to look at numbers and you have to treat it like a business to some degree, but it's about enjoying myself.
Right.
Like I watch some TV, but I don't do a ton, and I don't like to sit around and do nothing. I need to be busy.
Right.
And everything that has become a business started out as just something to keep me busy. And then it turned into like, oh, now this is like, all of a sudden I'm making a living. How did this happen?
Yeah, well, it's cool to get this, and this is why I want business owners to come in, because I want people to see, I guess to hear technically because we're on the radio, to hear the fact that, there's not one way to do something. Typically, if you're talking more on the corporate side, they would poo-poo everything you just said because
Right.
for them, it's all about the numbers.
Yeah.
And that works for them, but for you, you're a personable person, obviously being in the music industry and stuff like that, you kind of view things a little bit different than the guy wearing the three-piece suit.
Right.
But there are viable ways to run businesses. And I think, finding things that you're passionate about, or, because with you, what's really cool is getting into this, you kind of really took on the role of a ballast, in terms of trying to create some, to try and ease some of the waves that were going on in your area that negatively affected you.
Right.
And so I feel like there's, and you're going to be seeing this more and more, and I think like definitely down in Detroit you're seeing it with with some of the things that Quicken's doing down there in Dan. But the being able as a company to come in and not just do the business, but get involved in the other aspects around that area to really impact the economic community.
Yeah.
It may not be an instantaneous benefit that you can see, but I mean the long-term effects of something like that, not just for your business, but for all of the potential businesses coming along after you, is a really big thing. So kudos to you for that, and really spearheading something, that intense, it's, because you're a young guy,
youngish.
Lansing, well. Compared to Lansing, you're young.
There you go.
And Lansing's been around for a while, and so sometimes young people coming in and taking the reins is interesting because this city's been around for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I think when the young guys come in and they're like, this is what I'd like to do, it's kind of like, oh yeah, we go through this every year with the new kids, but being able to actually have that impact in the city is awesome. So congratulations on that. And what we're going to do now is we're going to actually go to a quick break. And when we come out of that break, we will have Ryan back with us to explain some of the cool things that are happening with the Rio Town Commercial Association and the Rio Town area of Lansing. So stick with us. We're going to go to a quick break, and we will be back in 2 seconds. You're listening to The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter on 89.7 LCC Radio, WLNZ, Lansing.
You're listening to The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter podcast. Like us on Facebook at Business Plan Radio, and follow us on Twitter at BizPlan Radio. That's BIZ Plan Radio. You can view our latest content on our Business Plan Radio YouTube channel. The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter airs Monday nights at 7 on your community station, 89.7 in mid-Michigan, or online at lccradio.org.
All right, welcome back to The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter. We really appreciate you sticking with us. This is the third and final segment of this week's episode with Ryan Wirt. He is a business owner here in the Lansing area. He owns and operates a studio called Elm Street Recordings over on Elm Street, fittingly, in Rio Town. He also is the executive director for the Rio Town Commercial Association and is also a part part owner in a company called Super Fancy Enterprises, which wins the Business Name of the Year award so far. So Ryan, again, thank you for being with us. We talked last segment a little bit more about your background, about the studio and stuff, and we started to get into your Super Fancy Enterprises, and we weren't really touching too much on the actual Rio Town development. And so why don't we talk a little bit more about that now? What is the Rio Town Commercial Association, and what is it that they do?
Yeah. We'll just call it Rio Town, keep it short. Rio Town's a nonprofit. It was formed in 2001, before my time, with the kind of purpose of just promoting and redeveloping the Rio Town district. The group of business owners invented the name Rio Town and said, this is what we're going to call ourselves now. We have mission statements and all that, but the big picture is really promoting. We're sort of a historic commercial district with a really prime infrastructure in terms of cool turn of the century buildings. We're right where the Grand River and Red Cedar meet. So we're sort of on this weird peninsula, and we have our own little geographic thing. And the area at the time and until recently was kind of just sort of desolate and abandoned, particularly the commercial district. So the group of business owners who were in the area came together and formed this nonprofit with the idea of kind of promoting the area and coming together and building the whole thing up. I don't know that any of the people who were involved in its formation are still around. And the organization has evolved multiple times in the last decade plus. But that's always been kind of the goal.
So are you guys involved with the Main Street organizations or anything like that?
Yeah, so we're an associate of the Michigan Main Street program. There are 3 levels, and we're the bottom one. We just joined last year. That's kind of a structure in place. It's the Michigan Main Street is part of the National Main Street program, and it all follows kind of the same set of principles for historic downtowns.
Right.
That's what they cover.
I'm sure you probably get this a lot, but we're in a city where there is a main street that's very championed, right? Old Town, and rightfully so. It's an awesome area. A lot of really cool history there. A lot of really cool things that are going on, but mostly because people got involved, right? And
right.
so,
yeah.
That's kind of where Rio Town is kind of in the development stage. Have you been able to work hand in hand with Old Town? Like, are you guys like rivals, or are you guys like teammates?
Yeah. It's been we've got kind of the kid sister thing, and we describe ourselves as that a lot. Where Old Town is a golden child, not just in the state of Michigan but nationally. They were the Main Street of the year for the country. It was last year, the year before, and so they're super well organized, super well established. They do everything the right way. And so it's always a little uncomfortable being in the shadow of that, but it's also awesome because we have the model right in front of us.
Right.
Our relations have always been good. We're friendly back and forth, but then this past year, one of my best friends, Austin Ashley, took over as executive director of Old Town, and so since then it's been even greater because Austin and I we have family dinner once a week and we hang out all the time. So we're super collaborative at this point, working on doing an event together this coming summer and so on. And I attend their meetings just to kind of follow how they put things together and so on. Right. So yeah, no, it's great sharing space with them.
Cool. Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times, and I've talked about this. I can't remember if it was last week or the episode before that, but I feel like a lot of times businesses are very competitive with each other, and this may be a little bit different than a traditional business necessarily, but being able to work together, I think, has a much greater good potential.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times people are competitive because they want to try and control the the pennies, but it's like, if if you work together, maybe you can share dollars.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's cool that you guys have that resource that you're able to tap into right here in the city.
Yeah, Austin and I actually gave a presentation at the Arts Council did a placemaking summit, and so the topic of our presentation was co-opetition.
Perfect.
And how on paper, and this is true in the studio too. I mean, I know every studio owner within an hour, and we're all pals. Like
Right.
there's no bad blood. We're competing districts, and the reality is, like, if you're going to go out on a Saturday night, you're going to pick a neighborhood. You're not going to do both.
Yeah.
How that having those choices is really good for everybody. It's like, you don't. Kathy Dunbar, as councilwoman, when Rio Town was first getting off the ground, gave the perfect example that I still go back to all the time, where if you're driving down the highway and you want to grab lunch, you don't get off at the exit that has the McDonald's. You get off at the exit that has the McDonald's and the Wendy's and the Taco Bell, even if you know you want to eat McDonald's,
Right.
because you want to go where all the things are.
Right.
Same is true for a district like the Rio Town Pub, best bar in Lansing, desperately wants there to be another bar in Rio Town. Even though it'd be competition, it means that now there's a place to go. And if you go to the Rio Town Pub and it's lame, you can go next door, and vice versa, and it makes the whole thing better.
Right.
The same is true on a city level. Like having one cool district isn't enough to make people want to stay in Lansing.
Right.
Old Town needs Rio Town to be cool, because it's better for the whole city. And I'm sure you can keep going on and on up the chain, but that's as big as I like to think.
Yeah, and what's funny is, I feel like a bar type thing was actually the thing that really kind of brought Rio Town back. I lived in Lansing my whole life, and I guess when you're a kid, you're not really aware of things as much as you are as you get older. But I didn't really even know about Rio Town until the Cadillac Club went in there.
Yeah,
it's no longer there now. Now I think it's Riverview Church, I believe.
Correct.
So I feel like that kind of got people thinking about Rio Town again and coming back to this strip of vacancies, essentially. Have you noticed a really big impact in terms of money coming back to that section? I know that there's Board of Water and Light just built a new building over there, and so that's obviously a new facelift.
Yeah.
Is there more businesses coming over there?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of going through the history, there are I have mental milestones for kind of when things happen. So the Cadillac Club opened, and there were a couple of really big music festivals in Rio Town. That was probably 2005, 2006. That was right when I started to get involved myself. The Cadillac Club was ahead of its time in some ways in Rio Town, and the neighborhood couldn't support it, and it got problematic and went out of business. But it definitely had an impact on making people aware of the area. Same with the big music festivals. I don't know that anyone remembers them now, or people who do, I don't know, don't associate it with Rio Town necessarily, but they essentially bankrupted the nonprofit, and that kind of let us reboot. So it seemed like a really bad thing at the time, was great in the long term.
Right.
And got people really aware of what the neighborhood was. Then again, in probably, I think 2010 was our first Rio Town Art Attack, and that was when the Deluxe Inn came down, which we covered in graffiti. It was a big, awesome project, spearheaded by a few people. I'm going to shout out to Sam DeBourbon, who's our kind of neighborhood graffiti artist who spearheaded that and does a bunch of stuff. Coincidentally, had to do community service for graffiti, and his community service was graffitiing the Deluxe Inn. So that worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I like that irony.
Yeah. But that was a huge turning point of, all of a sudden this super eyesore that was like constant murders and prostitution and everything else became a gigantic art piece, and then got demolished, and everyone was all of a sudden sad to see it go.
Right.
And then the Rio Town sign went up in its place, and so on. And we started getting our slow but steady festival structure. But getting back to the original question, originally when I kind of got involved with the nonprofit, it was just like, we need businesses here. I don't care what you're doing. Like, will people come to your business? Let's open it, man. Anything, please. And we're now at the point where the sort of main block of our commercial corridor is full. Like we have no space. As the director, I get calls, weekly, multiple times a week of people looking for commercial space, office space, retail, whatever, in Riotown, and there just isn't any available. And so we're now shifting from filling functional space to filling that space with really good businesses. So, we had 2 restaurants open in the last year and a half, Good Truck and Diner and Saddleback Barbecue, both of which are awesome. We have a bunch of big projects kind of lined up for next year, some of which I can't talk about, but any functional space we have now is basically occupied, and we're finally starting to shift into rehabbing some of the space that's been useless for a long time. So,
yeah, I feel like that's that's kind of a weird line that you have to walk, especially when there's a lot of redevelopment that has to get done. Is getting people into those existing buildings, getting those rehabbed, occupied, and then growing, right? Because I feel like a lot of times, you get these companies that want to come in and just tear down and build up new things, but a lot of times there's existing infrastructure there that can just kind of be patched up a little bit and make work. So let's kind of touch on Old Town a little bit.
Yeah.
So what is it that makes Old Town so good at what it is that they do from a Main Street, from the Main Street situation? What is it that makes them so good? Is it their incorporation in the arts? Is it their business friendliness? What is it that really separates them apart, and what is trying to be implemented at Riotown to kind of mimic that?
Yeah. I wish Austin were here because he would chat this right up. So Old Town, we always kind of phrase it when people ask, like, well, why doesn't Riotown have X that Old Town has? Old Town is almost precisely 20 years ahead of us in terms of their structure. So they're much more mature. They started in a really similar place. It was a really rough neighborhood, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And then a few property owners kind of got together and started making it happen. So I don't know all the history of how they got to be what they are now. But they, as an organization, are incredibly organized with a huge volunteer base, and and anyone who's ever helped out with any Riotown event will tell you, like, it's your volunteers that make or break everything. It's not anything else.
Right.
And so I think through whatever witchcraft over the years, they've developed a huge base of really devout sort of people who are really passionate about Old Town, and that's been tremendous for them. So their festivals are incredibly successful. Their organization has grown and has really good people in all of the important places and so on. And I think they've had really good directors and leadership over the years. So I think when I first kind of became aware of it when I moved to Lansing, it was Jamie Schreiner Hooper, who now coincidentally works in Riotown. But she and her husband own Zuby's and Cosmos and the Creel and Arconers and all that stuff. So they're kind of what we're trying to do in Riotown. Started out as looking at big picture nonprofit organizational stuff, and then as they phased out of that, got more into like putting their money where their mouth is and opening businesses and stuff in the district. So.
Well, that's cool. I mean, that's perfect for this show, right? Because it really just shows that businesses can have a very positive impact on not just the financial side, but also on the social side of a local economy. As far as the Old Town goes, do you think that the business integration and really attracting a few solid businesses to kind of get in there as the anchor, do you think that really kind of helped to provide that stability that everything could be founded on? Because I feel like and I own a media production company, so throwing out competitors is always a difficult thing. But like Message Makers, right? They're highly involved in everything that's going on in the Old Town situation, even on the festival side.
Yeah.
So do you think that being able to have that business in there really kind of helps that out?
Yeah, I think so. And I'll shift it over to Riotown just because I can explain it better in those terms. But
not a problem.
Yeah, it's exactly the same in Old Town, where you kind of need this mix of ingredients, and it's boots on the ground businesses that are super involved. So Message Makers is a great example where it's not that they're a gigantic company, but they're incredibly involved in stuff.
Right.
In Riotown, it's Elm Street Recording, myself, and like the Riotown Pub is a great example where if we're having a festival and we run out of beer, I just walk into the basement of the pub and I take a keg. And it's like, hey, Roxanne, I'm taking this. Bill me for it later, whatever. And sometimes she does, and sometimes she's like, it's a donation, whatever. And so they're really small businesses that can make a huge difference just based on who they are and what they do and how involved they are. I mean, a media production company obviously is a big, like, that's speakers and that's sound and video, and like that's all really, really important. But it can also be, like Curvaceous Lingerie in Old Town is someone that we've worked with a lot. And it's just because Lauren's really cool and super involved. And it's like, you don't think lingerie store, that's really going to make or break this event, but it's the person behind it.
So it's really the human capital.
Yeah.
More than anything.
On top of that, so I think that's one huge component. The other thing that's been really important for us, and you brought it up, is like the Board of Water and Light plant opening, and Senair is our other big employer in the neighborhood, formerly Cap Fund, Great Lakes Cap Fund. For any of these districts to work, like retail, restaurant, bar is sort of the like lifeblood of a commercial corridor, but none of it works without bodies in the area.
Right.
So Board of Water and Light opened, and all of a sudden we had 180 full-time employees, half a block away. And that alone, Board of Water and Light's been a good partner, and they've helped sponsor things and so on. But independent of any of that, just having that many people in the neighborhood every day makes a huge difference. I mean, that's way more than the population of our neighborhood who are coming in and out every day. And that means that, 2 restaurants can open and there are people to eat at them, because I can try my hardest, but I can only eat so many meals a day.
Right. Yep. Yeah, you definitely need people in order to support the economy, to keep it going and keep it afloat. But it just really seems like there's a lot of really cool things going on in Riotown and Lansing as a whole. I'm trying to really figure out what is it that's causing it, and it seems like at the end of the day it's just the people. There's certain businesses where people are genuine, and kind of the cliche, they put their money where their mouth is, like what you're talking about. Them actually getting involved and helping to steer the ship, I guess, is really where all of this is coming from. So, we have amazing people in the Lansing area. We have amazing resources, and it's just a matter of doing it now.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of all coming together, doing things like this, having these conversations, to figuring out, okay, well, what's out there? What can we do? What can we actually impact? And just having those conversations. So thank you so much for coming in today and having this conversation with me, and hopefully at least a few listeners out there. I don't know how many we have at this point, but just having the conversation is an important thing. So thank you so much for coming in and providing us with that background.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So, what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go ahead and end the program today. I will be informing you probably here in the next day or two as to who the guest next week is going to be. And always, we will be posting this episode to our YouTube channel as well as to LCC's SoundCloud. So if you haven't liked us on Facebook or Twitter yet, we'll actually be posting a link. Our Facebook is facebook.com/businessplanradio, and our Twitter handle is @bizplanradio. That's BIZ Plan Radio. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you next week. Have a very productive 2016. This has been The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter on LCC's 89.7 WLNZ Lansing.
This has been The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter Podcast. Like us on Facebook @Business Plan Radio, and follow us on Twitter @BizPlan Radio. That's BIZ Plan Radio. You can view our latest content on our Business Plan Radio YouTube channel. The Business Plan with Ryan Carpenter airs Monday nights at 7 on your community station, 89.7 in mid-Michigan, or online at lccradio.org.